I feel like there's too many coincidences happening between Africa and the rest of Africa in Egypt, Ethiopia, and North Africa that we need a better explanation than simply coincidence, or that every culture in the world begins like this. Not because I'm telling you, not because I think we should slip of the mind, but simply because every culture does not begin like this. We have seen multiple cultures around the world, and their beginnings are very different from each other. For instance, if we take houses, right? In ancient Egypt, we know they used to build straw houses in circular shapes, the same way that they build them in Ethiopia, South Africa, Central Africa, and West Africa. So, why is it that this type of reading or straw houses are built the same throughout the entire continent? But then when you start get out, right, you go to Americas, you start to get teepees, and you go to the eastern side of Asia, you start to get teepees and skins rather than straws. Now, you could say obviously those things are not available, which to some degree they're not, but at the same time, that's the point. And if we look at the fighting style, that's the worst one because that's a dead giveaway. You can coincidentally stumble on clothes, you can coincidentally stumble on shelter, but how do you coincidentally stumble on a fighting style that looks the same? Some people say some parts of the Middle East mimics some parts of Africa, and to some degree, I would agree. But that's simply because the people of Africa left and went to the Middle East. But the places in the Middle East only slightly resemble parts of Africa, whereas Africa almost wholly resembles Egypt. And it's kind of weird to say Africa and then say Egypt as if Africa is not part of Egypt. If you look at the loincloth, you can see that the loincloth, the way it's tied, is the same between the Egyptian and the Nubians, and then in extension, almost every other African. The cattle culture is exactly the same. You know, the type of cattle that they use are the longhorn, and this is the same in all of their cultures. And of course, it's raised to a high extent. It's raised to a praising stance. Now you could say almost a lot of cultures in the world had cattle, a lot of cultures in the world had all of this stuff. But to raise them to this level is not typical. Like I said, the clothing again is a dead giveaway. And I think we have to stop with this idea that we can be satisfied with it's all just a coincidence. And that we have to sort of demand a higher answer. The clapping with the dancing that looks exactly the same. And I've shown you in another video that other cultures have another base. So in the Middle East, it doesn't tend to be clapping and raising of the arms and stomping, which in African culture, that's ubiquitous. In Europe, I've shown you that sweeps are ubiquitous until the Africans come in, then they start adding stomps. Then there's that kicking dance, which, again, ubiquitous in Africa. I've shown you Ethiopian version of it. I've shown you a North African version of it, and I can easily show you South African version of it. And typically these dances are done by females, but they also can be performed by males. This also brings up a question of, do you not think that the rest of Africa, had they been given time, would look something closer to Egypt? So, in other words, if you take Ethiopia, right, which by the way was already going in a pretty sweet direction, if you take Ethiopia and you just extend its history about 500 years independently, does it not come across as Egypt to you? Especially the way they dress, the way that, the plain white, the the way they treat their women, the way the men are treated, the giant statues, the giant houses. You take Central Africa, Congo, and all those places, and again, if you extend Africa's history as far as it could have gone without too much outside influence, you must remember no history is completely isolated. It's unfair to look at the world as an isolation. Its history would have ended up looking like the Egyptian history from the past. And that's because we shared the same customs as the Egyptians.